At 38 years old, Solomon Reed, a man whose hands were more familiar with the internal workings of a city bus engine than the delicate machinations of high society, earned a steady $61,000 a year. It was an honest living, a good living, one that afforded him a life he had believed was stable. He was a lead mechanic for the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority, a title he held with a quiet, unassuming pride. But on a Tuesday night in late February, with the Philadelphia air holding the kind of damp, bone-deep cold that promised a miserable, lingering winter, his salary, his pride, and his stability meant absolutely nothing. He stood barefoot on the flagstone porch of the Winfield twin home he co-owned, the stone biting into the soles of his feet with a vicious chill. The heavy oak door, a door he had sanded and stained himself one sunny weekend, was locked. From the inside he could hear the muffled sound of laughter, a sound that was suddenly alien and cruel. His work boots, a pair of steel-toed Red Wings that cost him a hard-earned $80, were just inside, next to the small wooden bench where he always left them. His keys, his wallet, and his phone were on the kitchen counter, right where he'd dropped them that morning before heading to the depot. He had come home 2 hours early, a rare gift from his supervisor, hoping to surprise his wife, Dana. The surprise, it turned out, was his. He knocked again, the sound of his knuckles on the thick wood seeming small and pathetic against the rising wind. The laughter inside stopped. A moment of charged silence passed, and then the peephole darkened. The door opened a few inches, held fast by a brass security chain he himself had installed for $45 from Home Depot. Dana's face appeared in the gap. She was a beautiful black woman, her skin a smooth, warm brown, her hair styled in elegant, intricate twists that must have cost a fortune. Tonight her face was a cold, unreadable mask. She wore a cream-colored silk blouse he recognized as one of her favorites, a $600 garment she'd bought for a gallery opening. "What are you doing here, Solomon?" she asked, her voice devoid of any warmth. "I live here, Dana," he said, his own voice sounding hollow. "I got off early. What's going on? Who's here?" He could see past her into the living room, a sliver of the world that was, until 5 minutes ago, his. He saw the back of her father's head, Bernard Holloway, his silver-streaked hair perfectly coiffed. He saw her brother, Marcus, lounging in Solomon's favorite armchair. "It's over, Saul," she said, the words sharp and final. "We're done." Confusion warred with a rising dread in his chest. "Done? What are you talking about? We haven't even talked." Her father's voice, deep and imperious, boomed from inside. "Dana, close the door. We don't have time for this." She looked at Solomon, and for a fleeting second, he thought he saw a flicker of something. Pity, maybe regret. But it vanished, replaced by a chilling pragmatism he recognized as a core trait of the Holloway family. "Listen to my father," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It's just better this way. Clean break." "A clean break? You're locking me out of my own house, Dana. My clothes, my wallet. I'm barefoot." She glanced down at his feet, a brief, dismissive flick of her eyes. Then she looked back at his face, and the words she spoke next would be seared into his memory forever, a brand of pure, calculated cruelty. "You're not a husband anymore, Solomon," she said, her voice as cold and hard as the stone beneath his feet. "You're just paperwork. We haven't filed yet." Before he could process the sheer venom of the statement, the door closed. The security chain rattled, and then he heard the decisive, metallic click of the deadbolt sliding into place. It was a sound of absolute finality. He was outside. They were inside. He had nothing. The wind picked up, carrying with it the first stinging drops of an icy rain. He stood there, shivering, not from the cold, but from the profound, soul-crushing shock of being erased from his own life by the woman he had promised to love and the family he had tried so hard to belong to. What he didn't know, what they had no idea he would ever discover, was that the paperwork they dismissed him as was the one thing that would give him the power to dismantle their entire world. But for now, he was just a man in his socks, standing barefoot in the rain, a ghost haunting the porch of his own home. He had never felt so powerless. Have you ever been made to feel small by someone who was supposed to love you? It's a pain that goes deeper than any argument, a humiliation that sticks with you. Solomon was about to learn that the path to getting your dignity back sometimes starts in the coldest, most desolate places. The life Solomon had built with Dana was a study in contrasts, a careful facade of domestic normalcy papered over a foundation of fundamental incompatibility. He remembered the early days, the genuine warmth that had drawn him to her. She had seemed captivated by his quiet strength, his skillful hands, the way he could diagnose a sputtering engine by sound alone. He was a master of the tangible, a man who understood how things worked. The Holloways, on the other hand, were masters of the intangible, of perception, influence, and the art of the deal. Their house in Winfield, a handsome stone-fronted twin they had purchased 3 years prior for $285,000, was supposed to be their shared ground. Solomon had poured his heart and his savings into it. His $40,000, scraped together over a decade of careful budgeting and overtime shifts at the SEPTA depot, formed the bulk of their down payment. Her family had contributed what they called a $20,000 gift, but the way they brought it up at every family dinner made it feel more like a high-interest loan on his self-respect. He remembered a Saturday morning, a year into their marriage, when the kitchen faucet began to drip with an infuriating persistence. Dana had immediately reached for her phone. "I'll call a plumber," she'd said, already scrolling through a list of expensive mainline contractors. Solomon had gently taken the phone from her hand. "Let me take a look first." An hour and a $12 replacement washer later, the drip was gone. He had saved them a $300 bill. He felt a surge of simple pride, the satisfaction of fixing something with his own 2 hands. Dana, however, barely seemed to notice. She was already focused on a catalog, pointing out a $4,000 La Marzocco espresso machine. "Wouldn't this look amazing on the counter?" she'd asked. They bought it the following week on her father's credit card. Solomon, a man who drank simple black coffee from a $20 Mr. Coffee machine, never once used it. Dinners at her parents' estate in Villanova were a regular exercise in quiet humiliation. Their home was a sprawling, $2.5 million stone mansion set back from the road by a perfectly manicured lawn. The air inside felt different, thin and smelling of money and lemon-scented polish. Solomon would stand in the grand foyer, feeling out of place in his best $150 suit from J.C. Penney, while his father-in-law, Bernard, held court. Bernard, a man whose deep brown skin was as smooth as his deal-making, always wore a watch that cost more than Solomon's car. Tonight it was a $15,000 Patek Philippe. His mother-in-law, Eleanor, a regal woman with a spine of steel, would be dressed in a $3,000 St. John knit suit, her eyes sweeping over Solomon with a look that was not quite disdain but a complete and utter lack of interest. The conversation was always the same. It orbited around real estate portfolios, zoning variances, and the social maneuverings of the Philadelphia elite. They spoke a language of leveraged assets and capital gains that was foreign to Solomon. He would try to contribute, talking about a new hybrid bus system SEPTA was testing, and Bernard would give a patronizing smile. "That's nice, son. Very civic-minded." Then he would turn to Dana's brother, Marcus, and the conversation would immediately shift to a new commercial development deal worth $10 million. Solomon would fall silent, a ghost at the dinner table, a functional accessory to his wife. The house in Winfield became less a home and more a stage for Dana's aspirations. She insisted on a $1,200 Persian rug for the hallway, a piece so delicate Solomon was afraid to walk on it in his work socks. She replaced the perfectly good GE appliances with a suite of Viking stainless steel appliances totaling over $15,000. He paid for his half of these upgrades from his salary, his overtime hours funding a lifestyle he didn't want or understand. His contribution was labor and cash. Hers was vision and access to her father's credit line. Yet, he loved her. Or he loved the woman he believed she could be, the woman he saw in fleeting glimpses. He showed his love through acts of service, the only way he knew how. He was the one who woke up at 4 a.m. on frigid January mornings to start her $55,000 Audi Q5 so it would be warm for her commute. He was the one who made sure her coffee was waiting on the counter, just the way she liked it. He was the one who meticulously maintained the small garden in their backyard, growing tomatoes and herbs because she'd once mentioned she liked fresh basil. She accepted these gestures as her due, with the same casual air she accepted the sunrise. They were simply part of the service package that came with being married to a man like Solomon Reed. He was reliable. He was useful, but he was beginning to understand that in the eyes of the Holloways, and increasingly in the eyes of his own wife, he was not valuable. The betrayal wasn't a single, sudden act, like the turning of a deadbolt. It was a slow erosion, a series of 1,000 cuts that left him emotionally bleeding long before he was physically thrown out. The cruelty had been escalating for months, each incident a deliberate stone, laid on the path to that cold February night. It began in earnest about 6 months before the lockout, with a conversation that Solomon would later recognize as the opening salvo. Bernard Holloway had invited himself over on a Sunday afternoon. He sat in Solomon's favorite armchair, the same one Marcus would be lounging in the night of the lockout, and surveyed the living room with a critical eye. He held a crystal glass of iced tea, the condensation dripping onto a coaster Solomon had made. "Solomon," Bernard began, his tone avuncular and deeply condescending, "we need to talk about your portfolio." Solomon was confused. "My portfolio? You mean my 401k?" Bernard let out a short, dismissive laugh. "No, son, I mean your real assets, this house." He gestured around the room. "It's a nice starter home. You bought it for, what, $285? It's probably worth $350 now in this market. That's $65,000 in equity just sitting here, doing nothing." Dana, who had been quiet until then, sat forward. "Daddy thinks we should sell." "It's not about what I think. It's about what makes financial sense," Bernard corrected smoothly. "You sell this place, take the equity, and you get into a real investment. A multifamily in a transitioning neighborhood, or better yet, a property on the main line. It's about leveraging up. This," he said, waving his hand again, "is sentimental. Wealth isn't built on sentiment." Solomon felt a defensive knot tighten in his gut. "I like it here, Bernard. This is our home. We have neighbors we like. It's a good community." "Community doesn't pay dividends," Bernard said flatly. Solomon looked at Dana, expecting her to back him up. Instead, she sided with her father. "Don't be so sentimental, Sol," she chided, her voice echoing her father's dismissive tone. "It's just a house. Daddy knows what he's talking about." The conversation ended there, but the message was clear. Solomon's feelings were an obstacle to their financial ambitions. His idea of home was a quaint notion they needed to overcome. 2 months later, another cut. Solomon was promoted to lead mechanic at the Elmwood Depot. It was a big deal for him. It came with a modest raise, bringing his salary to $61,000 a year. But more importantly, it was a recognition of his expertise and dedication. He came home that evening buzzing with a pride he couldn't contain. He found Dana in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone. "I got it. I got the promotion," he announced, a wide grin on his face. "Oh, that's nice, honey," she said, her eyes not leaving the screen of her $1,200 iPhone. She double-tapped a picture, then looked up at him. "Lead mechanic, right? That's great." The lack of enthusiasm was a physical blow. He had expected a hug, a celebration, a shared moment of joy. Instead, he got polite disinterest. The real sting, however, came later that night. He was in the bathroom when he overheard her talking to her mother, Eleanor, on the phone. Her voice was light, laced with amusement. "Yes, he's very excited," Dana was saying. "He's so proud of his little promotion. It's cute, I guess. It's barely enough to cover the annual fee at the country club, but he's happy." His little promotion? It's cute. The words were like acid. He stood perfectly still, his hand gripping the porcelain sink, and listened as his wife belittled his accomplishment, the thing that gave him his own sense of worth, reducing it to a quaint anecdote for her mother's entertainment. In that moment, he felt an invisible wall go up between them. The cuts kept coming, faster and deeper. Their 5th wedding anniversary arrived in the fall. Solomon, wanting to recapture some of their early magic, made a reservation at a small, unpretentious Italian restaurant in South Philly, where they'd had one of their first dates. He spent weeks searching for the perfect gift, finally settling on a beautiful, custom-made silver bracelet from an artisan in Old City. It cost $400, a significant expense for him, but he wanted to give her something personal, something that wasn't chosen by her father or dictated by a brand name. The afternoon of their anniversary, she called him at the depot. "Soul, honey, I'm so sorry," she began, her voice slick with false regret. "I have to cancel tonight. Daddy needs me at a networking dinner at the Union League. It's a huge deal for the new waterfront project. I can't get out of it." He was disappointed but tried to be understanding. "Okay, Dana, we can celebrate this weekend." That night, alone in their house, he scrolled through social media. Her brother Marcus had just posted a story. It was a video from a loud, celebratory party at a trendy rooftop bar in Center City. And there was Dana, laughing, holding a glass of champagne. She was standing very close to a handsome man in a tailored suit. On the screen, Marcus had captioned the video, "Celebrating the Henderson merger. No work, all play." It wasn't a networking dinner. It was a party. She had lied to him, easily, and without a second thought, to avoid celebrating their anniversary at a place she now considered beneath her. From then on, the slights were constant and overt. His friends from the garage, good men who had known him for years, were no longer welcome at the house. "They're just so unrefined, Soul," she'd say with a delicate shudder. She would sigh with theatrical exasperation whenever his reliable 2014 Honda Civic, with its 150,000 miles of faithful service, was parked in the driveway next to her friends' new BMWs and Mercedes. At social functions with her family, she would often forget to introduce him, leaving him to stand awkwardly at the edge of a conversation circle until he would eventually retreat to the bar. The worst was at a charity gala her father had dragged them to. Bernard, in conversation with a city councilman, had gestured vaguely in Solomon's direction and referred to him as Dana's husband, the grease monkey. Solomon had waited for Dana to defend him, to correct her father. Instead, she had just given a tight, nervous little laugh and changed the subject. All of this led back to that final, brutal night. The supervisor at the depot, a good man named George, had seen the exhaustion on Solomon's face. "Go home, Reed," he'd said. "You've put in enough hours this week to power the whole city. Get out of here." Solomon had left at 8 p.m. instead of his usual 10 p.m. He decided to walk the few blocks home from the bus stop on City Avenue, enjoying the crisp night air, thinking he'd surprise Dana. Maybe they could just order a pizza and watch a movie, something they hadn't done in years. As he turned onto their street, North 54th, he saw the cars parked out front and his heart sank. Her brother's ostentatious $80,000 Porsche Panamera was parked behind her father's gleaming black $120,000 Mercedes S-Class. A family meeting? Without him? He walked up the path, the sound of their laughter filtering through the thick oak door. He knocked. The laughter stopped. The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Then, the peephole, the chain, Dana's cold face. The words that followed were not a spontaneous act of anger. They were the culmination of months of planning, of a calculated campaign to devalue him, to reduce him from a husband and a partner to an inconvenient piece of paperwork. The click of the deadbolt was not just a sound. It was the final, triumphant punctuation on their long, cruel sentence. The first few moments after the deadbolt clicked shut were a vacuum. Solomon stood on the porch, the icy rain plastering his thin socks to his feet, a profound numbness settling over him. The world had narrowed to the cold stone under his soles and the dark, unyielding wood of the door. Humiliation was a physical thing, a crushing weight on his chest that made it hard to breathe. He turned and walked away. He didn't know where he was going. He just walked. Each step on the cold, wet pavement was a fresh shock. He passed under the yellow glow of streetlights, a barefoot man in a mechanic's uniform, invisible to the cars that swished by. He eventually found himself in the harsh, fluorescent glare of a 24-hour Rite Aid on City Avenue, a beacon of sterile normalcy in his shattered world. The cashier gave him a wide-eyed look, but said nothing. The shame was a hot flush on his face. He felt like a vagrant, a crazy person. He found the payphone at the back of the store, a relic from another time, and fumbled in his pocket for a quarter he didn't have. He had to ask a stock boy for change, another small, sharp jab of humiliation. He called the one person in the world he knew would answer without judgment, his Auntie May. She lived in a small, immaculately kept row house in Cobb's Creek, a world away from the manicured lawns of the main line. Her voice, when she answered, was warm and sleepy. "Solomon? Baby, is everything all right? It's after 10. He tried to speak, but his voice broke. He could only manage a few words. "Auntie May, can you come get me?" She didn't ask questions. She just said, "Where are you, baby? I'm on my way." 20 minutes later, her 10-year-old Buick LeSabre pulled up to the curb. She got out, a stout, comforting presence wrapped in a thick coat, her salt and pepper hair in neat cornrows. She took one look at his bare feet on the wet pavement, and her face hardened with a fierce, protective anger. She didn't say a word about Dana or his situation. She just wrapped a thick wool blanket, which she kept in the car for emergencies, around his shivering shoulders and guided him into the passenger seat. The car smelled of peppermint and old hymns. At her house, she sat him down at her small kitchen table, peeled off his wet socks, and wrapped his frozen feet in a warm towel. She placed a steaming mug of sweet tea in his trembling hands. Only then did she speak. "You start from the beginning," she said softly, "and don't you leave nothing out." The next few months were a grim landscape of legalities and loss. Solomon moved into the spare bedroom in Auntie May's house. He hired a lawyer, a young, ambitious man named David Chen, whose office was a cramped space above a pizza shop in Center City. David was frank. The Holloways had retained one of the city's top family law firms. "They're going to try and bury you in paperwork and bleed you dry," David warned. And they did. Their first offer came via a letter from their lawyer, a man named Sterling, whose firm occupied 2 floors of a glass tower overlooking Rittenhouse Square. They offered Solomon a one-time payment of $5,000 to sign a quitclaim deed, relinquishing all rights to the house, and to agree to an uncontested divorce. The letter described the payment as a nuisance fee to expedite proceedings. A nuisance fee. For his home, his savings, his marriage. The insult was so profound it was almost clarifying. He told David to refuse. He tried to rebuild. He kept going to work at the depot, the familiar smell of diesel and the logic of machinery a comforting balm. He saved every penny he could, trying to scrape together enough for a security deposit on an apartment. 4 months after the lockout, in the humid heat of early June, he found a small 1-bedroom apartment for rent in West Philly. It was on the 3rd floor of a walk-up, but it was clean, and the rent was a manageable $1,100 a month. The landlord required a credit check. On June 12th, at exactly 3:30 in the afternoon, Solomon found himself sitting in a vinyl chair at a small credit union on Baltimore Avenue. The office was quiet, cooled by a rattling window air conditioner. The loan officer was a kind-faced black woman in her late 50s named Mrs. Jackson. Her desk was covered in pictures of her grandchildren, and the soft clicking of her beaded braids was a soothing sound as she typed his information into her computer. She printed a report, and her brow furrowed. She adjusted her glasses and leaned closer to the paper. "Mr. Reed," she began, her tone puzzled, "your credit score is good. Very responsible." She paused. "But there's something strange here. It's showing you as a co-owner on a major asset with a significant outstanding mortgage. The property on North 54th Street." Solomon's stomach tightened. "That's my marital home. My ex-wife is handling all of that. They're selling it." Mrs. Jackson shook her head slowly, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on a specific line in the report. "Well, I don't see how they can. According to this, the deed recorded with the city has a spousal consent clause. It's a standard protection for marital property here in Pennsylvania. It means the property cannot be sold, refinanced, or have its title transferred without your notarized signature." She looked up at him over the rim of her glasses. "Has anyone from a title company or a lawyer's office contacted you to sign any documents?" The room went silent. The hum of the air conditioner seemed to roar in his ears. A notarized signature. His signature. They had thrown him out like trash. They had called him a nuisance. They had told him he was just paperwork. But they had missed one crucial piece. They had lied, schemed, and erased him from their lives. But they hadn't been able to erase him from the one document that mattered most. A feeling, cold and sharp and clear, cut through the fog of his grief and humiliation. It wasn't triumph, not yet. It was something far more potent. It was leverage. He looked at the document in Mrs. Jackson's hand, at his name printed in black and white, legally and irrevocably tied to theirs. They thought they had all the power. They had no idea how wrong they were. A profound and chilling calm settled over Solomon as he walked out of the credit union into the bright June sunshine. The shame that had been his constant companion for 4 months receded, replaced by a cold, methodical anger. He didn't race to a phone to call David Chen. He didn't draft an angry text to Dana. He did the opposite. He went completely silent. He understood instinctively that his power now lay in their ignorance. They believed he was beaten, a non-factor, a nuisance, who could be bought off for a pittance. He would let them continue to believe it. He went home to Auntie May's, ate the dinner she had left for him, and for the first time in months he slept a deep and dreamless sleep. The next morning he began to work. He wasn't a mechanic of engines anymore. He was a mechanic of justice, and he was about to assemble his case piece by meticulous piece. His first stop was Philadelphia City Hall. He walked into the Department of Records, a vast, marble-halled room that smelled of old paper and bureaucracy. He paid the $25 fee and requested a certified copy of the deed to the house on North 54th Street. An hour later, he held it in his hand, the official seal a small, embossed sun of authenticity. He read the spousal consent clause over and over again. It was undeniable. Next, he went to the box of papers he had managed to grab from the house in the one supervised 10-minute visit they had allowed him weeks after the lockout. Dana's lawyer had watched him like a hawk as he'd thrown a few changes of clothes and personal effects into a garbage bag. But in his haste, he had also grabbed a large manila folder labeled House. Inside, he found everything: the original mortgage application, the closing documents, and, most importantly, his tax returns for the past 3 years, which listed the Winfield address as his primary residence and showed he had paid his share of the property taxes. He spent that evening scrolling through his old phone, the one he'd finally been able to replace. He went back through years of text messages with Dana. He found dozens of messages that at the time had been hurtful, but were now invaluable pieces of evidence. "Can you please keep your work boots in the garage? They're tracking grease all over the new rug." Proof of occupancy. "My parents are coming for dinner. Please try not to talk about bus parts all night." Proof of their intertwined lives. "Are you ever not here? I feel like you're always underfoot." This one, which had stung so badly at the time, was now a golden ticket, a direct complaint from her about his constant presence in the home she would later claim he had abandoned. He took screenshots of every single one. A week after his discovery at the credit union, the Holloways made their move. His phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. He let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text popped up. It was from Marcus, Dana's feckless, arrogant brother. "Yo, Soul, call me. Need to talk about the house?" Solomon took a deep breath and called him back, putting his voice through a filter of weary resignation. "Hey, Marcus, what's up?" Marcus's voice was slick with false bonhomie. "Hey, man. Long time no talk. Hope you're doing okay." The insincerity was nauseating. "Listen, quick thing. We've got a buyer for the house, which is great news, right? Good for everyone to just move on. We're just finalizing some of the paperwork, and our lawyer said we need you to pop by his office and sign a few things. Just a formality to get it all squared away." Solomon played his part perfectly. He injected a note of tired confusion into his voice. "Oh, okay. What kind of paperwork?" "Just, standard stuff. A quitclaim deed, I think he called it. Just signing your name off so we can get the sale through," Marcus said breezily. "Super simple. We'll even throw you a couple grand for your trouble. Help you get back on your feet." A couple grand. The offer was so insulting, so dismissive of his legal and financial stake, that Solomon almost laughed. They were trying to buy his half of over $150,000 in equity for the price of a used car. "Okay, Marcus," Solomon said, his voice flat. "Email me the details. I'll have my guy take a look at it." "Your guy?" Marcus's tone sharpened for a second, a flicker of annoyance. "You don't need a guy, Soul. It's simple. I'm just trying to make this easy for you." "Just send the email, Marcus," Solomon repeated, and then he hung up. The email arrived an hour later, not from Marcus, but from Sterling, their lawyer. It was curt and demanding, with a draft of the quitclaim deed attached. It stated that in exchange for a one-time payment of $2,500, Solomon Reed would relinquish all current and future claims to the property. Solomon didn't reply. He saved the email as a PDF, added it to the growing digital folder on his laptop, and labeled it Evidence_Exhibit_A. He was no longer the man they had thrown out into the cold. He was a plaintiff, building an airtight case. He was playing dumb. But every moment of his feigned ignorance was a turn of the screw, tightening the pressure on the hollow facade of the Holloway Empire. They had no idea what was coming. The following Monday, Solomon walked back into David Chen's office. This time he wasn't a man reeling from shock, seeking basic legal counsel. He was a strategist laying out a battle plan. He placed his laptop on David's cluttered desk, which was a universe away from the polished mahogany and glass of the Holloway's legal team. The office, small and smelling faintly of garlic from the pizza shop below, was a place of work, not performance. "They have a buyer," Solomon said, his voice even and cold. "They want me to sign a quitclaim deed for $2,500. David, a lean, energetic man whose sharp eyes missed nothing, let out a low whistle. "That's not an offer, Sol. That's a declaration of war." Solomon opened the folder on his desktop. "I have something better than their offer." He walked David through everything: the certified copy of the deed with the spousal consent clause, the mortgage documents showing his name and financial contribution, the tax returns proving his residency and financial responsibility, the litany of text messages from Dana, each one cementing his place in that house. Finally, he showed him the email from Sterling with the insulting $2,500 offer. David leaned back in his squeaky office chair, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. He looked like a man who had been dealt a royal flush. "Solomon, my friend, this is beautiful. This is poetry." He stood up and began to pace the small office. "They didn't just underestimate you. They committed a fatal error. They put their entire strategy in writing." He stopped pacing and pointed at the laptop screen. "They think they're in a position of power. They think you're desperate and uninformed. We are going to let them continue to think that right up until the moment we pull the rug out from under them." The strategy they devised was not about angry confrontations or bitter negotiations. It was cold, precise, and designed for maximum public impact. It was a legal garrote. "First," David said, ticking the points off on his fingers, "we go completely dark. No more phone calls, no more emails. Absolute radio silence. Let them get nervous. Let them assume you're just being difficult. Second, we let them proceed with the sale. Let them find their buyer, sign the purchase agreement, and pay for all the inspections and appraisals. Let them schedule the closing. Let them tell their buyer, in writing, that they have a clear and marketable title to the property. Every step they take is another shovel of dirt on their own grave. Third, I'll have a paralegal monitor the public records. The moment their sale is scheduled, it will appear on the docket. We'll know the date, the time, and the location of the closing." David leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "And then, on the morning of the closing, we strike. I will walk into the courthouse and file a lis pendens against the property. It's a formal notice that a lawsuit concerning the title is pending. It clouds the title instantly and irrevocably. No title insurance company on earth will issue a policy on a property with a alias pendens. Simultaneously," he continued, "I will send a courier with a package to the title company handling the closing. That package will contain a copy of the lis pendens, your certified deed, your sworn affidavit stating you have never consented to this sale, and copies of these text messages. We will also send the same package to the buyer's real estate agent for good measure." Solomon envisioned the scene: the Holloways in their expensive suits, the hopeful buyers, the smiling agents, all gathered around a conference table, ready to sign. And then, the phone call. The collapse. "The closing will implode," David said, his voice dropping with satisfaction. "The buyers will walk, and they will be furious. They will have grounds to sue the Holloways for breach of contract, misrepresentation, and possibly fraud. Bernard Holloway's reputation as a developer will be in tatters. It will be public, It will be humiliating, and it will be entirely of their own making. David sat back down and started scribbling numbers on a legal pad. The house is probably under contract for around $365,000 based on the comps you mentioned. The mortgage balance is what, $210,000? That's $155,000 in equity. Your legal half is $77,500. He underlined that number. That's our starting point. That's not what we're asking for. Given the attempted fraud, the emotional distress, and the sheer malice of their actions, we will demand your full half, plus punitive damages, plus all legal fees. We're not settling for anything less than $150,000. And after what they're about to do, they'll be in no position to argue. Solomon felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For months he had been reacting, absorbing blows. Now he was on the offensive. He was no longer a victim. He was a client, a partner in a meticulously planned operation. "Do it," Solomon said, his voice firm. "Let them walk right into it." The day of the strike was August 28th, a sweltering, hazy Tuesday. The air in Philadelphia was thick enough to taste. The city moved at a sluggish, heat-drugged pace, but in 3 separate locations, events were unfolding with the deadly precision of a ticking clock. At 2 p.m. in a sterile, glass-walled conference room at a major title company in King of Prussia, the atmosphere was one of cheerful, air-conditioned efficiency. The Holloway family was assembled in full force. Bernard Holloway, patriarch and architect of this disaster, was immaculate in an $8,700 charcoal gray Armani suit, his Patek Philippe watch glinting under the recessed lighting. Eleanor sat beside him, a statue of regal composure in a navy blue dress. Dana was there, dressed in a crisp, sleeveless white sheath dress that probably cost more than Solomon's monthly rent. She looked radiant, a woman on the verge of closing a chapter and cashing a significant check. Marcus, looking pleased with himself, fidgeted with his $1,500 designer tie. They were laughing and making small talk with their lawyer, Sterling, a man whose polished demeanor perfectly matched his 6-figure salary. Across the massive mahogany table sat the buyers, a young couple named Mark and Sarah. They were giddy with excitement, their faces shining with the unmistakable glow of first-time home buyers. Their agent sat beside them, shuffling through documents, a broad smile on her face. The closing agent, a woman named Patricia, was at the head of the table, her desk a neat landscape of color-coded folders and signature-ready pens. The sale price was $365,000. After the mortgage was paid off, the Holloways stood to walk away with over $150,000 in cash. It was the triumphant final scene of their little drama. Miles away, in his cramped office above the pizza shop in Center City, David Chen was on the phone. The air in his office was hot, stirred by a single, oscillating fan. "Confirm filing time," he said into his headset, his voice sharp and focused. 1:45 p.m., excellent. And the email to underwriting at the title company was sent at 1:50? He listened. "Good. Send the courier to the buyer's agent now. Go." He hung up and spun his chair to face his computer. On the screen was a PDF of the Ellis pendants, officially stamped by the court clerk. He had just thrown a bomb into the King of Prussia conference room. It just hadn't exploded yet. And in the quiet, sun-dappled backyard of a row house in Cobb's Creek, Solomon Reed was on his knees in the dirt. He had turned his phone off that morning. He wore old jeans and a faded t-shirt, his hands covered in soil. He was helping Auntie May stake her tomato plants, the heavy green vines drooping with unripe fruit. The sun was warm on his deep brown skin, and the scent of earth and basil filled the air. He listened to the hum of cicadas and the distant sound of children playing in the street. He was not thinking about the conference room, about the money, about the Holloways. He was thinking about the satisfying feeling of a securely tied knot, about the promise of a future harvest. He was building something quietly and with his own hands. The demolition was happening elsewhere, handled by professionals. Back in King of Prussia, the explosion came not with a bang, but with a buzz. Patricia, the closing agent, glanced at her phone as it vibrated on the table. An urgent email. She opened it. Her professionally pleasant smile froze, then melted away. Her face went white. She blinked, reading the screen again. Simultaneously, her desk phone rang. It was her company's chief underwriter. The conversation was short and clipped. She put the phone down and looked up. The jovial atmosphere in the room had evaporated, replaced by a tense silence as everyone stared at her. "Mr. Holloway," she began, her voice barely a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again, her professional composure shredded. "There appears to be a problem with the title." Bernard Holloway let out an indulgent chuckle. "Impossible. We have a clear title. Sterling has handled everything." "I'm afraid not," Patricia said, her voice trembling slightly. She looked at the buyers with an expression of profound apology. "I've just received a notice from our legal department. Alias Pendens was filed against this property at 1:45 p.m. today. It was filed by a Mr. Solomon Reed." The name dropped into the silent room like a stone. Dana's face contorted in a mask of pure disbelief. Marcus stopped fidgeting with his tie. Bernard's smile vanished. Sterling, the high-priced lawyer, immediately went on the offensive. "This is clearly a frivolous claim, a procedural trick by a disgruntled ex-spouse. We can have it expunged." "It's not a trick, sir," Patricia cut him off, her voice gaining a measure of strength born of corporate self-preservation. "Our underwriting department is refusing to issue the title insurance policy. They've received a package of documents from Mr. Reed's attorney." She took a shaky breath. "It includes a certified copy of the deed requiring his signature and an affidavit from Mr. Reed stating he never signed any waiver or consent form. The spousal waiver document you submitted with your packet." She looked directly at Bernard. "Our legal team believes the signature and the notary stamp may be forgeries." Forgery. The word echoed in the glass-walled room. It was an accusation of a felony, spoken in a public forum. The buyers, Mark and Sarah, looked at each other in horror. Their agent was already on her feet, her phone to her ear. "The deal is off," she said loud enough for everyone to hear, "and you will be hearing from our attorneys." They gathered their things and stormed out of the room, leaving a wake of stunned silence. The facade of the Holloway family shattered in an instant. Bernard's face, usually a smooth mask of control, turned a blotchy, apoplectic purple. He rounded on Dana, his voice a low, furious snarl. "What did you do? You told me this was handled. You told me he would sign." Dana, white-faced and stammering, looked desperately at her brother. I thought, Marcus, you said you had a guy. You said he could handle the notary stamp." Marcus looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Dad, I thought it was no big deal." The closing agent was already packing her briefcase, avoiding eye contact with any of them. Sterling, their lawyer, was pale, realizing he had been party to a potential crime. The public humiliation was total. The empire built on perception and flawless appearances had just been publicly and catastrophically dismantled in a sterile conference room under the unflinching gaze of fluorescent lights by a man they had dismissed as nothing more than paperwork. The collapse at the closing table was not an end, but the beginning of a cascade of consequences, each one falling like a domino, striking the Holloways with relentless, procedural force. Solomon experienced none of it firsthand. He learned of it through clipped professional updates from David Chen, each one detailing another crack appearing in the foundation of the Holloway dynasty. Consequence 1. The buyer's lawsuit. True to their agent's word, Mark and Sarah, the would-be buyers, filed a lawsuit within a week. They sued Bernard Holloway, Dana Holloway, and Holloway Properties for breach of contract, fraudulent misrepresentation, and emotional distress. They demanded the return of their $15,000 earnest money deposit, plus an additional $50,000 to cover their inspection fees, legal costs, moving preparations, and the sheer bad faith nature of the deception. The lawsuit was filed in the Court of Common Pleas, making it a public record. News of a prominent mainline developer being sued for fraud by a young couple became a juicy tidbit for local real estate blogs and community papers. Bernard's sterling reputation began to rust. Consequence 2. The criminal investigation. The title insurance company, eager to distance itself from any hint of fraud, immediately filed a report with the Montgomery County District Attorney's Office regarding the suspected forged spousal waiver. An official investigation was launched, focusing on Marcus Holloway and the guy who had handled the notary stamp. Marcus was formally charged with multiple felonies, including forgery and conspiracy. The cost of retaining a top-tier criminal defense attorney was astronomical, with an initial retainer of $75,000 that Bernard had to pay out of pocket, a sum that would only grow as the case dragged on. The specter of a prison sentence now hung over the family. Consequence 3. The toxic asset. The house on North 54th Street, once the symbol of Dana's upwardly mobile ambitions, became a lead weight chained to the family's finances. With the LI's pendants filed by David, the property was legally unsellable. Yet, the financial obligations remained. The $1,800 monthly mortgage payment, the property taxes, the homeowner's insurance, all of it now fell squarely on the Holloways. With the initial burst of the housing market beginning to cool, the property was no longer a guaranteed profit center. It was a bleeding wound, draining nearly $2,500 a month from Bernard's accounts with no end in sight. Consequence 4. The legal surrender. Forced into a corner, the Holloways were now negotiating with Solomon from a position of absolute desperation. David Chen laid out their terms, not as an offer, but as a demand. They would pay Solomon his full 50% share of the equity, calculated at the peak valuation of $365,000, which amounted to $77,500. On top of that, they would pay an additional $100,000 in punitive damages for the attempted fraud and emotional distress. Finally, they would cover all of Solomon's legal fees, which tallied up to $5,000. The grand total was $182,500. Sterling, the Holloway's lawyer, tried to bluster and negotiate, but David simply stated, "This is the price to make the LI's pendants go away, and to avoid a separate civil suit for fraud. My client is also prepared to cooperate fully with the district attorney's investigation into Marcus. Take the deal, or we let it all burn." They took the deal. Consequence 5. The social implosion. In the rarefied air of the main line, reputation is currency. The story of the disastrous closing, the lawsuit, and Marcus's criminal charges spread with breathtaking speed. Bernard, once a respected figure, was now whispered about at the Philadelphia Country Club and the Union League. Business associates became distant. Potential partners for a new development project quietly backed out. The invitations to charity galas and exclusive parties stopped coming. For Eleanor, a woman whose entire identity was built on social standing, the public shame was a fate worse than financial loss. The Holloway name was no longer a mark of prestige, it was a stain. Consequence 6. The final dissolution. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. Dana, the woman who had dismissed her husband as paperwork, was left with nothing. Her father, furious and financially strained, blamed her for the entire fiasco. Her brother was facing years in prison because of her scheme. The settlement she was forced to sign was a document of total surrender. She received no part of the house's equity. Her name was removed from the deed, and she watched as a cashier's check for $182,500 was made out to Solomon Reed. Her father cut her off financially. The $55,000 Audi Q5 was repossessed. She had to move out of the now toxic Winfield house and into a small apartment in a less fashionable suburb. A few weeks after the settlement check cleared, Solomon received a series of voicemails from her. The first was angry and accusatory. The second was pleading. The third was just her, crying, the sound broken and pathetic. The final one was a choked whisper. "You won, Saul. I hope you're happy." He listened to all of them, one after the other. He felt no rage, no satisfaction, no joy. He just felt a vast, quiet emptiness. A chapter of his life, defined by their cruelty and his pain, was finally, irrevocably over. He deleted the voicemails and never looked back. 2 years passed. The Philadelphia seasons turned, washing the city with spring rain and blanketing it in summer heat. The sharp edges of Solomon's pain softened, replaced by the sturdy framework of a new life he had built with his own hands, on his own terms. He stood in the wide doorway of a clean, well-lit 2-bay garage in the Grays Ferry neighborhood. The sign above the door, painted in simple, bold letters, read, "Solomon's Auto and Apprenticeship." The air inside smelled of grease, clean concrete, and the faint metallic scent of new parts. This place was his. The $182,500 settlement had been the seed. He had invested $100,000 of it to purchase the small commercial property and equip it with modern tools and lifts. It wasn't a palace of glass and steel like the offices of Holloway Properties, but its foundation was solid, built on skill and integrity. He wasn't just fixing cars, he was building futures. He had 2 apprentices, teenagers named Jamal and Kevin from the neighborhood. They were good kids, bright and eager, but with few opportunities. They reminded him of himself at their age. He was teaching them more than how to rebuild a transmission or diagnose a faulty sensor. On Fridays, they would sit in the small office, and he would teach them how to read a profit and loss statement, how to register an LLC, how to manage inventory, and how to calculate quarterly taxes. He was giving them the one thing the Holloways had tried to deny him, a sense of ownership. "A job pays your bills," he told them one afternoon, wiping his hands on a rag. "A skill builds your life, but ownership buys your freedom." With another $60,000 from the settlement, he had made a down payment on a home. It wasn't a grand twin in Winfield or a mansion on the main line. It was a classic 3-story brick row home in his beloved Cobb's Creek, just a few blocks from Auntie May. It cost $220,000, and it was perfect. The floors creaked, the pipes sometimes groaned, but it was filled with warmth and light. On Sundays, the whole house smelled of his auntie's yeast rolls. The deed, filed securely at City Hall, had only one name on it: Solomon Reed. Every time he turned the key in the front door lock, a quiet, profound sense of peace settled over him. This was his. No one could ever lock him out again. One rainy Saturday morning, he stopped at a Wawa on his way to the shop to grab coffee. As he stood in line, he heard a hesitant voice say his name. "Solomon?" He turned. It was Dana. He almost didn't recognize her. The expensive, intricate hairstyles were gone, replaced by a simple, natural puff of her hair pulled back from her face. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by the red uniform polo of a retail chain. She looked tired and older than her years, but the hardness in her eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. "Dana," he said, his voice neutral, I just wanted to say, "I'm sorry," she said, her voice low, not meeting his eyes. "For everything. I was a fool. I was raised to see people as assets, to see life as a series of transactions. I never knew how to just be a partner. I'm so sorry for what I did to you." He looked at the woman who had left him barefoot and broken on a cold winter night. He searched within himself for the old, familiar sting of anger and betrayal, but it wasn't there. All he felt was a distant pity. He had moved on so completely that she no longer had the power to hurt him. Her apology wasn't for him. It was for her. "I hope you find your way, Dana," he said, and the words were genuine. He paid for his coffee and walked out into the rain, leaving her standing in the bright, artificial light of the convenience store. He had forgiven her, not because she deserved it, but because he deserved peace. The weight was finally gone. Later that day, back at the shop, he watched as Jamal carefully reassembled an alternator, his young face a mask of concentration, his hands, though covered in grease, moving with growing confidence. Solomon realized then what true wealth was. It wasn't a $2.5 million mansion or a $15,000 watch. It wasn't a number in a bank account or a name on a list at the Union League. True wealth was the skill in your hands and the knowledge in your head. It was the community that holds you up when you fall, like his Auntie May had. It was the dignity of building something that belongs to you and no one else. True wealth was the quiet, unshakable pride of turning a key in a lock that you owned, a door that no one could ever close on you again. It's a hard lesson to learn, but sometimes the people who try to take everything from you are the ones who show you what's truly valuable. They can take the house, the money, the life you thought you had, but they can't take your skills, your character, or your ability to rebuild. Have you ever had to start over and found you were stronger than you ever imagined? Share your story in the comments below. Because stories of resilience are what give us all hope. And don't forget to subscribe to Love Beyond Pride for more stories of justice and new beginnings.